65 million years ago was the last extinction. We've been building biologic life and diversity over the last 55 million years, recovering from that massive collapse of life. And now we're halfway through the sixth extinction. We've lost 40% of biodiversity on the planet in just the last 50 years.
Wow.
And we've lost 40% of life on Earth in 50 years.
Wow.
So we're nearly halfway done with the sixth extinction. This is the first one that's been done by the hands of one of the species on Earth. Previously, it took these huge astrologic events. Big asteroid hit, covered the whole world in dust. It created a solar winter. We had that big collapse of life. We are now losing one species every 20 minutes to extinction. So in this brief talk that I'll have with you today, we're going to lose two species to extinction. My guess is we probably haven't even had time to categorize, name that species, and we're losing them. And so we are right now on track. The farmers we're working with are telling us that on our current track, we will only have 60 harvests left on Earth. Only 60 more summers to harvest crops that would feed any biologic life on Earth. We are depleting soil so fast now. We see on the medical side that we're somewhere around an estimate of 70 years left before we lose the ability to reproduce as a species. We're now seeing 1 in 3 males with infertility, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women with infertility. In the United States, Australia, much of Europe, much of the developed world, these numbers are hitting. These are the other numbers here that are dominating the news. 1 in 36 children now with autism. That's actually formally diagnosed. 1 in 36, obviously, in the United States, we don't have a screening tool for this, so we are probably underestimating that by a significant amount. Attention deficit now, 1 in 8 children. Asthma, 1 in 10. Again, that's a gross underestimation because we don't screen for asthma in our children. So in the universal screening programs that they have in Australia, Canada, the UK, we know these numbers are closer to 1 in 4 children with asthma. Allergies now diagnosed in 1 in 4 children. That's food allergies, environmental allergies, the like, and it goes on down the list. At the bottom of the list, you see cancer, 1 in 2. Major depression, just mentioned by my incredible colleague Norm Shealy, 1 in 2 there. And so 50% of adults will see that major depression in their lifetime. That's in contrast to 1 in 100 in 1900. And so 100 years ago, we had 1 in 100 people depressed. Now we're looking at 50% of the population and the adults going to be affected by that condition. Cancer in males just hit 1 in 2. If you didn't see this, 49% of American males now diagnosed with cancer before they die, and that does not count skin cancer. These are solid organ or blood-borne cancers in 50% of males. Women are just behind that at 1 in 3. Dementia now at 100%. It looks like, unfortunately, by age 28, 100% of the population shows early signs of dementia, memory processing deficits, short-term memory issues, and all of that by age 28. Unfortunately, most of you look quite a bit younger than 28, but you're speeding towards that threshold of change there. All right, so this is the trajectory that we see. So those numbers are grim enough, but it's the trajectory that's terrifying. And so in the 1975 range, you see on the far right, 1 in 5,000 children had autism. By 2012, we see this extraordinary explosion happening with 1 in 88 children with autism. And in the medical world, there was this huge sense of denial that, well, maybe we're not actually seeing an epidemic of autism in our children. Maybe we just are now recognizing it and diagnosing it better. Maybe it's a diagnostic criteria that's made these numbers look so dramatic. Well, that may have held if it didn't happen that we then went on to double those numbers in the next 3 years. By 2015, we were at 1 in 44 kids with autism. And obviously, we didn't dramatically change our awareness or our diagnostic tools in the 3 years between 2012 and 2015. Our most recent numbers coming out of 2016 are the 1 in 36. We haven't even started to tabulate 2017 or 18 at this point. So it wouldn't be surprising if we're currently at around 1 in 20 children with an autism spectrum disorder in the United States of America. At our current rate, the numbers coming out of MIT with Stephanie Seneff, but then also the watchdog organizations on public health, EWG, and some of the other ones are estimating that we will hit 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 children with autism by the time we hit 2035. So we're 16 years away from seeing 1 in 3 of our children born with an autism spectrum disorder, which is a neurologic injury that keeps the children from being able to process the world around them. The drugs that we put kids on in this kind of spectrum, especially in the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder spectrum, which will be affecting 1 in 2 children by then, are adrenaline drugs. They mimic speed, and so Ritalin and Adderall are the drugs that we put them on. And what you just saw with Norm Shealy's presentation is that when we move out of when we change the frequency of resonance in the brain, we lose creativity fast. And the adrenaline fight or flight state does this. It takes you from this capacity for creativity and makes you focus because there's an immediate threat. That's the fight or flight state. And so with that threat, you lose that creative process. And so we're literally raising generations of children where a whole chunk of them cannot have a creative thought because they're being forced through a pharmaceutical tool to be in a fight or flight state. There's your trajectory of cancer, also on a rapid increase over the that's just 1990 to 2015. So just in one generation, we more than doubled our cancer rates in males and nearly doubled it in females. We are told that this is a genetic disease, right? And that genetic injuries lead to cancer, blah, blah, blah. If it was a genetic disease, it's literally impossible that we double the rates in a single generation. All right, so that we are being lied to as doctors as much as we're being lied to as population and patients there. To put it in perspective, 1965 in the United States, 4% of the entire U.S. population had a chronic disease. Today, 2015 at least, 46% of U.S. children have a chronic disease. And so that gives you a sense of the speed of collapse of human biology. So how is it possible that all of this happened in just a short 20 years? What happened in the world around us? All right. It turns out that this is all going to turn back to the gut. Every single condition on that list that I just showed you has now been shown to have its roots in the gut. And when I say the gut, we're talking about the microbiome. The microbiome is a catch term now that's one of the most frequently searched terms on the internet now. The microbiome is poorly understood by doctors, scientists, and general public, and we think of bacteria as the dominant species there. I'm going to try to change your perspective on that a little bit today, but let's focus on the bacteria for a moment. We think of bacteria being in the human gut, but this incredible study is showing us that you actually have your entire body as an organic garden. The organic garden runs from your skin, where you touch the outside world, to your gut, where you touch the outside world, all the way into the very organ systems that make your body. So in this incredible study, they looked at human breast cancer. My background is in cancer research and chemotherapy development. So if you'd met me 10 years ago, I would have never heard of acupuncture. I would have never heard of anything Norm Shealy just told you. I would think that Norm Shealy was a complete crackpot and all of this stuff. And so I was definitely inside the box of Western medicine. But these studies that started coming out 10 years ago started to break up my understanding of cancer, because I had thought that cancer was genetic injuries of the human cell. But we increasingly saw that the bacteria in the human was predicting what type of cancer you got. And so by scanning the genome of the gut, we realized, whoa, prostate cancer always is missing these species of bacteria. Breast cancer is always missing these species of bacteria. And so that was a huge paradigm shift. How could bacteria in your gut possibly determine what kind of cancer you're going to get? This study went beyond the gut and started looking for the DNA of microbes or the bacteria in the breast tissue itself. And so they biopsied the breast and found that Methylobacterium radiotolerans was really enriched in the breast tumor itself. And so this was the first study that really said there are bacteria in the cancer or around that cancer in that woman's breast. And so then the thought was, I wonder if it's actually an infectious process. Maybe breast cancer is an infection. And so they went and biopsied the other breast of the same women and found that in that healthy breast that doesn't have the cancer yet, there was a different bacterial species dominant. It's called Sphingomonas. And so what an extraordinary realization that the human breast, the healthy human breast, is teeming with bacteria. That was news to everybody. We think of gut, we think of skin, maybe your sinuses. We've come to accept that there's bacteria in some places that may be healthy. But inside the human breast, no, that was news. Inside the human prostate, that's news. Inside the human kidney, that's news. And so it turns out that all of our tissues are being inhabited by bacteria. Again, they're thinking, well, maybe it's this change from Sphingomonas to Methylobacterium that determines cancer in the breast. But then they went on to the bottom half of this paragraph that you see here and found the bottom sentence there, that the bacterial DNA load was correlated inversely with advancement of disease. What that means is that the more sterile the tumor, the less bacteria present, the more aggressive the cancer got. The cancers that grew zero bacteria killed women within a year. And so the more sterile you are, the more disconnected from that bacterial biome, the faster you die. This is changing our understanding of cancer, because we were told that cancer is the most common human genetic disease. Transition from a normal cell to a malignant cancer is driven by changes to a cell's DNA, also known as mutations. That's the current definition to this day, and yet it's totally failing in the face of the science that we have going. Furthermore, as pointed out, you can't have a population curve of cancer if it's just a human genetic disease. So we got to look at that microbiome in our DNA to say, what is it then? How is the microbiome changing our DNA? And it turns out that DNA is hardly the genes that we think of. And so each human cell contains about 1 meter of DNA. That's about the length of my arm. And so you can kind of wrap your head around that little metric. But it turns out that you have 50 trillion cells, which is a difficult number for you to wrap your head around because that's a lot of zeros on the end of a 50. All right, so you have 50 trillion human cells. And then if we said, okay, well, let's take that 1 meter and then string that end to end. So if you took all of your 50 trillion cells, unwrapped your DNA, and stuck that end to end, how many times do you think you would wrap around Mother Earth? Any guess? The Earth is 28,000 miles or so in diameter, or in circumference. And so if we started stringing your DNA, do you think we could get you around the world?
150.
Yeah, 150 times maybe? Yeah, it turns out you would wrap around Mother Earth 2 million times.
Wow.
Your DNA would wrap around Mother Earth 2 million times.
Wow.
If you could really see me, or if I could really see you, we would be rendered useless because we would collapse in front of each other, worshiping the complexity, the beauty, the mind-blowing, astronomical scale of life itself. You are incomprehensible in your complexity, in the beauty that you're knit together with. Don't let a doctor dumb you down. Don't let a doctor fit you into a box in a drywall little room with shitty lighting and terrify you with something like the word cancer. Don't let a doctor tell you you have depression or psychosis or anxiety. You're huge. You're so powerful. We can't measure the scale of your glory. You are so full of grace. You're so full of life. You're so full of love.
Amen.
You can't be stopped unless you let yourself be stopped. We give way too much power to the people around us. We give way too much power to the common paradigm, the belief systems that shape us and limit us. If you stepped into your power for 1 second, disease would be gone. And I've seen that happen. I've seen metastatic cancer diagnosed by MRI the night before disappear in a 30-minute session where somebody suddenly becomes so present that they find their power. And then I've gone on to see that same person after 1.5 years of no cancer present fall back into the belief system that they are not powerful and die from metastatic cancer within months. I've seen it come and I've seen it go. The awareness of your power, the awareness of who you really are. And we have an opportunity to wake up. Everything I got crammed in my head, everything I've got crammed in my knowledge base is worthless. It's just such a tiny piece of the truth. I don't have time to teach the world. You don't have time to change the world stepwise. We need to make a paradigm leap if we're going to get to play longer than 70 years. We're speeding towards the extinction of our species. We've been here for 180,000 years in this current form. That's not Neanderthal, that's further back and all that. In this Homo sapien form, 180,000 years, fossil record. We're now 70 years from the end point. The children being born today, even if they live as healthy as they possibly can, in 70 years they haven't even reached their full, half of their full potential of life. We are at the end point. Our children will not grow to their full potential. They will not experience life in full because the species is going to blink out unless we absolutely change everything. We need a paradigm leap so giant, so profound, that we stop being the limited species that we've been to date. All that DNA wrapping around Mother Earth 2 million times, only 1% of that codes for your genome, the genes that would make your body. 1% code for the genes. The 98.5% or so, we've called junk DNA. Because if you look around in nature, that's all you see, really. It's like so much junk, you're like, oh my gosh, that forest would be nice, but all the junk. But scientists, in our incredible hubris, because we can't figure out what it's doing, we just assume it's junk. Well, that 20,000 genes that you have is an extremely pathetic number, because it turns out that a fruit fly has 13,000 genes, and a flea has 30,000 genes. So you fall somewhere between a fruit fly and a flea. And I just saw a bunch of you wives look at your husband being like, I knew it. Not surprising at all. The other 99% of the genome, called junk, turns out controls everything. And so in the last couple of years, we found out that all of that junk DNA actually codes for something we never knew existed, which is called microRNA. We thought that the whole DNA purpose was to go build a human body, or build a monkey, or build whatever DNA template it was to build. Turns out that it is very, very plastic. It is changing all the time. Those 20,000 genes can make over 300,000 proteins. And so it's very plastic. Imagine having a template for a house, a blueprint of a house that could build 4 million different houses. That's your DNA. Your DNA can build 4 million different bodies. The genetic information your parents gave you can build 4 million different bodies because the microRNA are not limited to your species. A single gene can make over 200 different proteins. You extrapolate that out, you can make that 4 million different variants of you today. The interesting thing is microRNA travel outside of the cell. So this is the first time we've come to realize that your DNA is not limited to you. It turns out that the microRNA leaves the cell, goes into the bloodstream, can travel great distances to communicate across big spaces, and so that my brain can respond to the genetic information in my gut and vice versa. And so it turns out that DNA is traveling via the RNA's little segments all over the body to change things. And then more recently, we've come to find out that this stuff travels. Dr. John Gilday in my lab is one of the 5 experts in the world on something called the exosomes, which are these little pockets of information of microRNA that leave the body. And they can leave your body in your sweat, in your breath, in your urine, in your feces. You're exuding this. And the microRNA will then go into your environment and change the genetic behavior of everything around you. And it turns out that some 15% already we know. We've just figured out this microRNA thing as a concept, let alone started to really decode it. But already in our infantile state of this, we find out that 15% of the microRNA in your bloodstream is from the bacteria around you. Another 15% are from the fungi around you. Another 5% we've already identified is from the food you just ate. The DNA in your meat, your soy, whatever you had for breakfast, that DNA has quote-unquote junk DNA that's going on to make microRNA, and that food is turning on and off genes in your body. You are now a consumer of the most stressed out food chain on the planet. If you've ever seen the way that chickens are raised today, it is a horrific event. 7 to 12 cages stacked high, shatting on each other's heads, never see the light of day, never touch the ground, never scratch soil. They're in wire cages so small they can't turn around. They have to clip their beaks off so they don't commit suicide. They are butchered 6 to 8 weeks from birth. By that time, we've lost a third of the flock to invasive E. coli and infections because they have no microbiome. They just have weeds there in the microbiome. Totally abnormal state. What microRNA do you think that chicken has got turned on at the moment that we butcher that thing and turn it into a chicken salad? The genes turned on are screaming, hopelessness, I'm alone, nobody cares, I don't even know why I'm here, I don't even know what I'm doing, why am I being tortured, why doesn't anybody care, why doesn't anybody see what's going on? That's the microRNA that hits your bloodstream when you eat a chicken sandwich. And it goes on to turn on the reflective experience in you. The leading cause of complaints in my clinic in women are poor sleep quality and anxiety. Chronic pain being probably number 3 behind that. Why is that woman manifesting that? Because the food she's consuming is screaming, I'm alone, I'm not cared for, I'm this and that. She's having a panic attack because she's getting the emotive experience of the microRNA from the chicken sandwich she just ate. We are literally consuming stress, and it's manifesting and changing our DNA to do the same. Let me show you how great the universe is around you. We think of the bacteria as being this incredible event. There should be somewhere around 40,000 species of bacteria in your human experience. They have 2 million genes compared to your 20,000. They then have a microRNA generating junk DNA much greater than that. The parasites, gross, right? You don't want parasites. 300,000 species of parasites. What's the chance that they're against us? 300,000 species of parasites. It turns out there's this critical parasite that lives underneath your eyelid. Without that weird-looking worm that lives under your eyelid, you have eye disease. We are incredibly dependent on all of the microbiome to be working with our biology, not against our biology. They have 2 billion genes, those 300,000 species of parasites.
Wow.
How many species of fungi do you think? You go to a fancy grocery store and maybe you got like 4 or 5 mushrooms on the shelf and you feel fancy, right? Ooh, turkey tail, that's a good spot. Turns out you got 5 million species of fungi on planet Earth around you. 5 million species. The amount of genetic information in the fungi is beyond imagination. 125 trillion genes already identified, and we haven't even finished that journey of understanding that. How many species of viruses? We have no idea. There are simply just too many viruses on Earth to categorize, and they swap DNA so fast, we can't even figure out what a species would look like. But we do know that there's 10 to the 31 viruses on Earth. That's 1 with 31 zeros after it. There's not a name for that number. That number happens to be 10 million times larger than our stars in the entire universe. If you could see me, if I could see you, we would collapse in front of each other and worship the complexity and beauty that is in life itself. But let me tell you what, these doctors and scientists are so brilliant. With those 10 to the 31 viruses on Earth, we've decided to vaccinate the population of one species called flu. And that's our public health campaign. We're going to protect you from flu, because clearly the viruses are against us. 10 to the 31 viruses, and we've picked one. And we will not let you in a hospital or in your workplace without getting a flu vaccine. We are completely brainwashed. We are completely out to lunch on any logical perspective. Do not believe the doctors and scientists around you. Forgive them for their idiocy, because they mean well, most of them. It's not our fault. But don't wait for us to change. There's not time. If you want your grandchildren to see a full life, we have to change absolutely everything. And so we need to embrace this. That life around us needs to be part of our daily life. And if we do that, we will change our genome. This is what it is to have a gene pool. The entire planet is your gene pool. If you are suffering a lack of health, it's because you're suffering a lack of environment. You don't have enough touch to the world around you. And if we kill it all, we will die. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're killing it all. Antibiotic usage and cancer mortality. On the right you see the red states, that's where you have the highest risk of dying from cancer. On the left you see the number of antibiotics prescribed per state. The darker blue, the more antibiotics. And you'll notice an incredible correlation. The more antibiotics we prescribe, the more likely you are to die of cancer. The more we sterilize your environment, the more likely you are to die of cancer. Well, it's not just the antibiotics the doctors are prescribing, because this map happened. 1970, 1994, and long before that, we had this very stable pattern of cancer death risk in the United States, which was all in the north, northeast, and northwest, depending on what types of cancer. Suddenly, in a 13-year span, 1994 to 2007, we completely reversed that death pattern. What the heck happened? These maps are from the Centers of Disease Control, and yet they have put out 0 alerts that we in the United States completely flipped our cancer map, and we had an event similar to Chernobyl, or something vastly greater than that, to induce that speed of change in our population that we would suddenly reverse the cancer map. Keep in mind that every single state had an increase of cancer over that 13 years, but something completely blew it up in the South. And the antibiotic prescriptions have been stable over time, so we can't blame the doctors for this shift. And so this is the molecule that we've come to recognize in our lab. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, the weed killer. Never patented as a weed killer, but it's been patented as an antibiotic, antifungal, antiparasite. It kills life around us. We've been told it's safe for humans because we don't have the active targets for this. Turns out that it's not safe for humans either, but what hubris to say, don't worry humans, you can use this chemical ad nauseum because it just kills everything else, not you. What kind of hubris do we do that with? Well, it turns out that molecule blocks what we call the shikimate pathway. It's an enzyme pathway through which we make the aromatic amino acids, which we call the essential amino acids, because you can't make these because you don't have the shikimate pathway. And so it turns out that only the bacteria, the fungi, and the plants have this possibility of making the aromatic amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks for all the proteins that would become your body. And we've deleted the ones that you can't make from the food chain by spraying our food with Roundup. Genetically modified crops. Why is GMO bad? If you ask doctors, they don't even know why GMO is bad. Why it's bad is it's been genetically engineered so that it can be sprayed directly with a chemical that blocks the ability of that food to make the building blocks for life. And that's why the weed dies, is because you just subtracted out the amino acids that would build it. Well, look at what these amino acids are. Phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, histidine, thyroxine, L-dopa, 5-HTP. What are those? Those are all the amino acid precursors to the sexual steroids and your neurotransmitters. You cannot reproduce, and you cannot have the absence of major depression or anxiety disorder because we just subtracted out all of the building blocks for health in those sectors of the body. Shikimate pathway, making all of that stuff. So what did we do? So glyphosate spraying, Roundup, 1992, before GMO, we had to be pretty cautious because it was killing all the plants that we sprayed, so you just had to spot spray the weeds. But by 1996, we started genetically modified Roundup-ready crops. By 2011, you can see how much we were able to spray because we were able to spray the soybean, the corn, all the sugar beets, etc., alfalfa, go on down the list. And so we're spraying it directly. And so if we're right that this antibiotic is sterilizing things, then we should see a huge correlation between cancer death and this chemical. But you'll see that while there is kind of a general correlation, it's not perfect, right? Because you should see the highest death rates down there in the south. And you should see the highest concentration of Roundup there. And the spraying seems to be more dense up in the north. Well, it turns out it's a water-soluble molecule. And that's the tributaries of the Mississippi River right there. That huge red district there, you'll see, collects some 85% of all the Roundup sprayed in the United States of America. And the last 90 miles of that runs from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. It's called the Mississippi River. And that last 90 miles is now called Cancer Alley. The highest rates of cancer in the entire developed world happen in the last 90 miles, where we have the highest concentrations of Roundup in the world. We are now measuring 75% of the rainfall with Roundup in it, 75% of the air breathed with Roundup in it. We are dumping some 5.2 billion pounds of Roundup worldwide into our soils and water systems. Mental illness follows the same pattern as the cancer. It is in the Roundup districts. Tick-borne disease, same districts. Lyme disease, you think Lyme disease is from the ticks. No, Lyme disease is a collapse of the microbiome, and the spirochete of the Lyme is trying to do damage control, just like the methylobacterium in the woman's breast. It's not the methylobacterium's fault that there's cancer there, it's trying to do damage control. It's not the Lyme that's causing the symptoms. The Lyme is there to clean up the mess that's been left behind by the devastation of the ecosystem. Again and again, glyphosate usage worldwide, again, over 2 billion kilograms in 2016. More recently, we're looking at almost 3 billion kilograms. So, we've heard that chronic inflammation is really the root cause of all human disease, and so we need to look at the relationship between the microbiome and that. And that turns out to be one protein called the tight junction. This protein structure is the Velcro that holds all of your cells together. Your gut lining is the largest surface area that you have in your body. Some 2 tennis courts in surface area is your gut. That's over 2 to 4 billion cells laced together into one coherent barrier system. And that barrier system is completely dependent on this one Velcro protein. And it turns out it's not just the gut, but every single blood vessel, the endothelial cells of the blood vessels, held together by the same Velcro protein. And the blood-brain barrier that protects your peripheral nerves and your central nervous system from the outside world, again, held together by the same tight junction protein. The kidney tubules responsible for detoxing your body, held together by the same the same tight junction Velcro. And so now imagine if we damage this one protein. You'd be a leaky sieve at the front end. Everything going into your gut would start leaking in and overwhelming your immune system, inducing chronic inflammation. You'd be absorbing all the wrong things. You'd be absorbing plastics, endocrine disruptors, heavy metals, all that, and you'd be having a hard time getting the right things in, nutrients and the like. And then once in, because your kidneys have collapsed, you can't get those toxins out effectively, and so you literally turn into a sponge for toxin. That is the diagnosis or the pathophysiology of autism, it turns out. These children are soaking up all the toxins from their environment. This is looking at that Velcro protein now. And so this is looking at small intestine. Glowing green is the Velcro holding all of those cells into one coherent membrane. At 20 parts per million of glyphosate, it blows apart in 16 minutes. In 16 minutes, the 20 parts per million of glyphosate that's on your potatoes, on your beets, on your root vegetables, blows apart your gut membrane. And you are now a leaky sieve, not just at the gut, but across the whole system. When we started adding glyphosate to wheat in 1992 by spraying it to kill the wheat quicker, we called it a desiccant, a drying agent, not a weed killer. And so it started getting sprayed on wheat in 1992, and every year after that, more acreage was sprayed. So the black line is the number of acres sprayed in the United States with Roundup to kill the wheat early. Yellow bars are the incidence of celiac, autoimmune disease, to the wheat. You could see a much steeper curve going along that, which would be gluten sensitivity. It turns out we created gluten sensitivity by adding Roundup to the wheat itself. If you go to countries like France, where they don't allow this to happen, you can eat a croissant and have no problem. Mm-hmm. You eat croissant here, it can take you 3 or 4 days to recover from the brain fog. Mm-hmm. We have created gluten sensitivity as a population event. Our lab has now shown that the synergy is between the gluten and the glyphosate. So this is a paper we published a couple years ago now, but on the left is the control membrane with a high degree of protection. You eat one piece of pizza of gluten, you lose about 15 to 20% of your protection. If you eat just a tiny bit of glyphosate, you'll lose 15 to 20% of that protection, but if they happen to be in the same bite of food, you lose 80% of your protection. So it's the synergy between glyphosate and gluten that has created this gluten sensitivity phenomenon, leaky gut, leaky brain. Here's the spectrum of disorders. If you want to take a picture of that, you'll be the smartest clinician on the planet. Every single condition that we face today is due to one process, which is leak. We are leaking and we are gaining inflammation throughout the course of our lives. Now, when your friend calls and says, I can't sleep, I've got poor sleep quality, or I was just diagnosed with infertility, or I have an autoimmune disease, you can look back at this slide and say, oh, you're just right here on the natural cascade of leak. That's the entire process of the chronic disease epidemic across the ages, from birth to age 78, which is currently our average life expectancy. We are 49th in the world for health outcomes. Why? Because we removed the medicine from the food. So not only have everything I showed you so far is that we've created this decimation of human health, in addition to the decimation of human health, we're creating disease. We took the medicines out of the food that would treat those diseases. So that same shikimate pathway that I told you earlier about that makes the aromatic amino acid building blocks for life makes the alkaloids. And the alkaloids are literally the medicine within our food. These are some examples of the alkaloids. The quinine compounds that should be in your fruits and vegetables keep in check parasites. We should have a healthy relationship to parasites, but we don't because we've lost the natural control mechanisms within our food. Anti-asthma, anti-cancer, cholinomimetics, these are the ones that would help us with attention deficit and autism. Vasodilatory agents like quinquamine, gone from our food, so we get hypertension. Antiarrhythmics like quinidine, gone from our food, and so now we have a high rate of arrhythmias like PVCs, PACs, atrial fibrillation, like all of these abnormal rhythms of the heart. Analgesics, all these morphine compounds that should be in our food, gone. And so now we all have chronic pain, and we have opiate addiction on a level that's never been seen in human history because we simply remove those compounds from the food that should be managing your pain all the time. Anti-hyperglycemics, the piperine that should be in our fruits and vegetables, gone, so we all have prediabetes and diabetes now. So with one chemical, we created the chronic disease epidemics, and we removed the medicine from the food. And brilliantly, that company, Monsanto, that brought us to the Roundup, has been owned by pharmaceutical companies for decades. Just ironically got sold to a German company called Bayer. Bayer is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Made all of their money in the early 1900s on a patent with a really cool new drug called heroin. They patented heroin in the early 1900s, was in Sears catalog and everything else as the non-addictive morphine. That didn't work out so well. And so they created heroin. They created a lot of the efforts to really change the human fertility in the past. All kinds of different questionable acts that they've done. They've subtracted the medicine out of the food so that we can sell it back to you 10 times more expensive. Right? It turns out Mother Earth is more graceful than all of that. And so the hope that we have in this whole thing is that Mother Earth planned for our insanity and the microbiome planned for our insanity. And it turns out that the bacteria don't just deliver the macronutrients and the micronutrients that we're looking for. It also delivers this molecule and about 1 million different variants. Every species of bacteria and fungi creates a different version of this carbon molecule. This is what our lab has become famous for, is all these molecule derivatives. We're now pulling that out of fossil soil. We call them carbon snowflakes because they're so diverse in their makeup. And together, once you get millions of those variants together, you end up with what functions as a wireless communication network. And they've become the element within the dietary supplement line called Restore. You can find that online, you can find it elsewhere. But Restore has become profound because we are not trying to do anything with this supplement. It's literally the only supplement that's trying to do nothing. It's like the wireless network between your cell phones. The cell phone tower has never initiated a phone call. The cell phone tower has never told you what you're having for lunch. Somebody else's cell phone on the other side has. And so that's what Restore does. It is the wireless network that just is passively standing between the cells to amplify the message from one cell to another cell. And it's interesting that the microbiome is responsible for human cell-to-cell communication. So you can't actually get human cells to talk to each other effectively without that microbiome communication. So what does it do? When you put communication back up and going, remember, the Restore compound doesn't do anything. But what happens is healing breaks out when enough information is given. In the top left, you see the control membrane. On the right, you see glyphosate blowing that membrane apart in 16 minutes. If you go straight down, you see the effect of the communication network on those cells. It knits itself right back together. It zippers itself right back up. If you do the opposite pattern, where you take the control and give it first the TerraHydrite communication network, you get a 40 to 50% increase in the tight junctions already. And then you give it glyphosate and nothing happens. There's no damage done because you're healing at a faster rate than you're injuring. We have taken this to 20,000 times more Roundup than you would see in your diet, and you continue to do perfect protection. Profound effect of nature. It's a publication we did. I'm going to speed through that. Gluten, same thing. Gluten will dissolve that membrane through the gliadin compound, breaking apart the membrane, creating leak, but you give back the communication network of the bacteria, everything zippers itself right back up. And so you don't have gluten sensitivity, you have deficiency in microbiome and its communication network. Blood-brain barrier, same phenomenon. Control, give it back the communication network, you see almost a doubling of the blood-brain barrier effect. If you give it the gluten injury, you see the drop, but if the bacterial communication network is present, even with the gluten, no injury on the blood-brain barrier. Antioxidants. Glutathione is the most prominent antioxidant in your entire body. Terrahydrite increases that. The communication network increases your glutathione production in the human gut by 800%. The bacteria are doing everything in this whole process. You look at gluten, glyphosate, overgrowth bacteria, and things like this. They can create toxic peptides, which creates a little compound called zonulin, which breaks apart the tight junctions of your gut, your blood-brain barrier, your vascular system, your kidney tubules, and you get chronic inflammation and disease. Get back the communication network, you increase DPP4 enzymes, increase the glutathione, increase the breakdown of zonulin, and you block all of that and you reverse that process. So, how do you get healthy? This is the quick summary slide right here. Vaginal birthing is the most important thing that you can do to launch a kid on a healthy journey. The baby needs mom's microflora. The microflora in mom's vaginal canal will become their foundation for life. If you do a C-section, that child is born sterile, no bacteria from mom, and immediately thrown on a scale to do an APGAR score where they're going to start to inherit the hospital flora. That baby's going to look like the hospital, not like mom. So the first and most important thing in a C-section is to swab the baby down with vaginal mucus. And so if you or your child is about to have a baby, practice or review how to swab the vaginal canal. It's very simple. Take a big cotton swab on a stick, all the way deep from in the vagina, all the way to the opening of the vagina, swab, and then cover the baby in that mucus. Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, rectum, get that kid coated, and I would do it every hour on the hour for the first few hours of that child's life. Make sure that kid is mom's microflora, not the hospital. Most important intervention you could possibly do in a child's life right there. Breathe nature, get outside. My hotel room last night smells like mold, smells like all kinds of junk in there. It is a few species that are overgrown, confused, detached from some sort of balance. And so I'm breathing crap in. I need to get out after this talk and breathe some real air just to help readjust. Stand barefoot, get out in the garden, grow your own food again. Take it back from Monsanto. Monsanto exists because we created it. We got lazy and stopped making our own food. Take it back. Grow a little bit of food. Grow one mint plant if that's all you got time for. Touch something real. Get outside. If you get naked, then I really give you extra credit. Get naked. Get back in touch with the garden. Eat fermented foods every day. And ultimately hug, kiss, and generally celebrate every human, animal, and plant you can touch. Thank you for your attention. That's my whole team. Love all of you.